Hey, I'm Paul Chang. That heavy, sloshing plastic box sitting under your hood right now isn't as dead as the guy at the parts counter told you it was. When you turn the key and hear that rapid clicking stutter from the starter solenoid, your first instinct is to hand over $250 for a new battery. But the truth is, roughly 80% of those batteries fail early because of a hard, crystalline crust suffocating the lead plates inside, not because the unit is actually worn out. The big auto parts chains have built an absolute empire on you not knowing the difference between a genuinely destroyed cell and one that's suffocated. There's a simple chemical reaction, one relying on about $1 worth of a common household powder that forces those stubborn crystals to dissolve, suddenly restoring enough conductivity to shock that battery back to life. I used to see guys do this exact thing to keep their old farm trucks running. But before you go pouring this stuff into your car, there is a very specific catch about how long this fix actually lasts, and it's the reason the industry stopped talking about it decades ago. I need to take you back to how a battery actually dies, because it rarely dies a natural death. Most people think of a car battery like a gas tank. You use the juice, the tank empties, you refill it with the alternator. Simple. But it's more like a chemical sponge. Inside that black plastic casing, you have stacks of heavy lead plates swimming in a bath of sulfuric acid and distilled water. When everything's working right, those plates absorb and release energy in a clean fluid exchange. Now here's what actually happens when you let a vehicle sit for too long, or if you only drive a couple of miles down the road every day. A grayish, crusty residue starts growing on those lead plates. This is called sulfation. Picture a thick layer of concrete poured over a sponge. Suddenly, the sponge can't absorb water anymore. That crust physically blocks the acid from touching the lead. Your battery is not empty, it is suffocating.
I've pulled hundreds of these out of customer cars over the years. You'd test them, and the diagnostic machine would just blink replace. And at $250 a pop, that is a fantastic little transaction for a major parts retailer. They take your quote-unquote dead battery, give you a measly $5 for the core charge, and sell you a brand new one. What they don't mention is that 80% of the time, the underlying lead structure inside that old battery is perfectly fine. It's just coated in that stubborn crust. Actually, hold on. Let me back up. Let me be very clear about something before we go further. If your battery casing is visibly cracked, or if it's leaking a pungent, rotten egg-smelling fluid, that unit is garbage. Don't mess with it. But if it looks intact and just won't hold a charge above 12.2 volts on a multimeter, you're dealing with sulfation. So how do you break the concrete? Back in the 1940s and 50s, replacement parts were scarce. You couldn't just run down to a brightly lit auto store on a Sunday afternoon. Farmers and mechanics figured out a chemical workaround. They realized that if you introduce a highly soluble magnesium compound into that sulfuric acid bath, it triggers an ionic swap. The magnesium basically attacks the lead sulfate crust, dissolves it back into a liquid state, and exposes the bare lead plates once again. This isn't magic, it's basic chemistry. And the exact substance they used is sitting in the health and beauty aisle of your local grocery store right now. Magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, pure, unscented Epsom salt dissolved in hot distilled water. The first time an older mechanic showed me this trick, I thought he was completely out of his mind. We had an old shop truck that had been sitting behind the bays through a brutal Michigan winter. Stone dead. It wouldn't even click the starter solenoid. He took about 10 heaping tablespoons of Epsom salt, mixed it into a quart of distilled water heated to about 150 degrees, and carefully topped off the cells inside the battery. We let it sit for a bit. An hour later, that heavy truck engine fired right up. I honestly couldn't believe what I was looking at.
And the industry knows exactly how effective this reaction is. They just prefer the $250 solution to the $1 solution. If you drive anything with an engine, you're going to want to stick around, because the math on this gets frustrating quickly. Right now, we're talking about saving a couple $100 on a single replacement. Think about how many batteries you buy over a decade. Most people swap them out every 3 or 4 years because of this exact sulfation problem. You were paying thousands of dollars over a lifetime for lead plates that haven't actually failed yet. You know what? I just realized There are companies out there right now selling $30 battery restoration powders in shiny little bottles online. It's infuriating. I looked up the safety data sheets on a few of them recently. Almost every single one is just repackaged magnesium sulfate. They're charging a massive premium for bath salts. But here's where I need to step in and stop the hype train. The internet is flooded with videos claiming this $1 trick will make your battery last forever, that it's a permanent cure to never buy a battery again. I used to believe that too, until I started tracking the actual data on the cars we patched up. I started load testing these restored batteries a month after pouring the mixture in. The resting voltage comes back beautifully. You hit it with a multimeter and it reads a healthy 12.6 volts. But voltage is only half the story. The other half is the raw muscle required to turn over cold steel. And that's where the secret starts to unravel. Let me walk you through exactly what happens when you hook up the equipment. You take a battery that reads 10.5 volts. Dead. You pry off the plastic caps on top. You mix your hot distilled water and pure magnesium sulfate until the water is completely clear, meaning the salt is fully dissolved. You carefully pour it into each of the 6 cells until the lead plates are submerged. Then you put it on a slow 2-amp trickle charge overnight.
Now, I need to flag something here. I'm showing you what I do on my own workbench with 15 years of experience under my belt. Sulfuric acid will eat straight through your clothes and your skin, and the charging process releases hydrogen gas, which is highly explosive. If you aren't wearing acid-resistant gloves and safety goggles in a well-ventilated space, do not even attempt this. There is zero shame in handing the problem over to a parts store if you're not comfortable handling dangerous chemicals. My goal is to help you understand the mechanics, not to pressure anyone into a hazardous project. Okay, so I mentioned removing the caps, but here is an important detail. If your battery is completely sealed, usually labeled as maintenance-free, this is totally off the table. You can't pour the solution in without destroying the structural integrity of the plastic casing. This only applies to the traditional flooded lead-acid batteries where you can physically see the removable rectangular caps on top. When you come back the next morning and take the battery off the charger, the multimeter will show you a beautiful 12.6 volts. It looks like a brand new unit. But voltage is just electrical pressure. It isn't volume. To measure volume, you need a carbon pile load tester. Picture a heavy metal box with thick, spring-loaded copper clamps and a physical needle gauge on the front. It simulates the massive electrical draw of a starter motor. A healthy battery might push out 600 cold cranking amps. That is the brute force required to shove cold steel pistons up and down against engine compression. When a battery is badly sulfated, that number plummets to maybe 50 amps. After the Epsom salt trick, you push the heavy silver button on the load tester, the internal coils get glowing hot, you watch the needle sweep across the dial, the voltage holds, but the cranking amps only jump up to about 150 amps. Actually, let me be precise about that number. 150 amps might be enough to spin a little 4-cylinder engine on a hot July afternoon. It'll get you to work. But try relying on that same output on a freezing November morning, and you are going to be stranded in your driveway listening to your dashboard relays click.
So far, we've talked about the $250 you save by not avoiding a replacement, the $30 you keep away from the online scammers peddling fake powders, and the immediate satisfaction of fixing it yourself. But we have to look at the chemistry long term. I used to think the magnesium permanently repaired the lead plates. Wait, repaired is the wrong word. I thought it halted the damage entirely. Then an engineer on a trucker forum posted the teardown data from a battery running this exact mixture for 6 months. I was completely wrong, and the pictures proved it. The salt doesn't restore the shed lead. It just forces the electrolyte to become hyperconductive for a short window. The trade-off is brutal. Introducing magnesium into that highly acidic environment accelerates the internal corrosion of the plates. You are basically forcing the battery to eat itself from the inside out, just to give you a few more bursts of energy. The active material on the plates eventually crumbles, falls to the bottom of the plastic casing, and permanently shorts out the cell. No chemical powder in the world can put that metal back onto the grid once it pools at the bottom. The industry knows this. The guys selling the expensive powders know this. You are creating a zombie battery. It is walking, it is working, but it is fundamentally decaying. Which brings us to the really uncomfortable part of this whole situation. If this is just a temporary band-aid, why do so many mechanics from the older generation swear by it as a permanent fix? The answer has to do with how cars used to be built and what modern vehicles are quietly doing to your electrical system while the engine isn't even running. A 1970 Chevy pickup had a starter motor, some headlights, an ignition coil, and maybe a scratchy AM radio. When you turned that key and pulled it out of the dashboard, the electrical system was completely dead. Just cold steel and dormant wires sitting in silence. That is exactly why the old mechanics thought the Epsom salt trick was a permanent cure back then. The battery actually had time to rest. The slow, steady charge from an old alternator the next morning was enough to keep it relatively happy, and the salt kept the conductivity high.
But walk into a quiet garage today and listen to a modern vehicle. Just stand there in the dark for a minute. You will hear faint clicking, a low hum from behind the dashboard, relays firing, modules waking up to check tire pressures, scanning for key fobs, sending encrypted telemetry data to a server thousands of miles away. It never truly sleeps. Actually, hold on, I should clarify that. The manufacturer calls it sleep mode in the service manual, but it's really just a low-power standby state. Your car is constantly sipping acid out of that battery 24 hours a day. This parasitic draw is exactly what accelerates the sulfation process. You park your car on a Friday night after work. By Monday morning, it has been slowly bleeding voltage for 60 hours straight. Multiply that tiny invisible drain by millions of vehicles sitting in driveways across the country. We are talking about billions of dollars in premature battery replacements, mountains of heavy lead being unnecessarily recycled, all entirely driven by the fact that your car's computer system refuses to shut down. The auto industry understands this completely. They could install larger capacity commercial batteries or secondary lithium backup units just to handle the overnight parasitic drain, but why would they spend the money? A failing battery every 3 years is guaranteed foot traffic back into the parts department. So far, we've tallied up the $250 you save today, the $30 you keep away from the online scammers, and the hidden internal decay of a zombie battery. But the real stake here is your reliance on a system engineered to fail on a schedule. I used to tell customers to just pop the hood and disconnect the negative terminal if they were parking for a week. I was completely wrong to do that. On modern cars, cutting the power can wipe the transmission learning data, reset the throttle body parameters, and trigger a dashboard full of warning lights that require a dealer-level scanner. You can't just pull the plug anymore. You know what? I just realized. I wonder how many people have traded in perfectly good cars because they thought they had a massive electrical gremlin when really it was just severe plate sulfation messing with the voltage sensors. Modern computers completely freak out when they don't see a rock-solid 12.6 volts. They throw ghost codes for transmission failures when it's really just a suffocating battery.
So where does that leave you standing in your garage? The $1 Epsom salt trick is a fantastic triage maneuver. If you are totally broke, if you're stranded at a hunting cabin, or if you just need to limp an old piece of yard equipment through the end of the summer, go to the pharmacy and mix up the hot water. It absolutely works as a band-aid to get you out of a bind. But if you want to actually beat the auto parts stores, you stop the concrete from pouring in the first place. The real secret isn't a powder. It is a smart battery maintainer, a physical box you plug into the wall that feeds a tiny pulsing electric current directly to the lead plates while the car is parked. That specific pulse breaks up the sulfur molecules before they ever have a chance to crystallize and harden into a crust. It costs about $30 once. You clip the metal leads on, look for the little blinking green light in the corner of your garage, and walk away. That is how you force a standard lead-acid battery to survive for 7 or 8 years.
You don't need magic, you just need to outsmart the parasitic drain. I'm going to be taking a deep dive into the specific oil additives the dealerships use behind closed doors next week, and you're not going to want to miss the teardown footage on that one. If you want to stop overpaying to keep your car on the road, consider subscribing. Save your money, use the trick only when you have to, and buy a new battery on your own terms.